Hey everyone, so let's get started. What we're going to actually do is start from scratch completely. And so we have a clean directory and we're going to run Rails new. And we're just going to call this projects. And I'm going to pass two arguments in. I'm going to pass in a big T to show that I don't want to include unit test. And I'm going to set the database to PostgreSQL. And so those two flags are pretty minor. The dash T, if you ever decide to switch to like RSpec, dash T is probably pretty common that you'll add. Okay, so now that we've installed all our gems, we can actually go into this projects directory. And the first thing I'm going to do is add my getignore. And I'm going to just say create project. This is just a pattern that I follow that I always first commit just the getignore file. And then we will add Rails. So the first thing that we're going to do is just define our schema. And so what I want to do is Rails DB. I'm going to drop it to start, but because I've already done this once, but I'm going to create this database. You normally wouldn't have to do the drop, but I have to do that. And the first thing we want to do is just add Devise. So we will add some level of user authentication and users in this, but it's not going to be anything major. The only thing I want to double check is the Ruby gems for Devise. I want to get the version, which is the latest version is 4.3.0. I just always do this because I like to specify my gem version when I add one. So we'll go into our gem file. I'm just going to minimize all of these because these lines are just for Rails. And we're going to add Devise, and it was 4.3.0. And we'll bundle. And then I generally always commit and just say that I added a gem. And so the next thing that we'll do is if we run Rails G, and I'm going to look for Devise here, you can see that this really isn't a great way to look at it. Let's see if that's maybe, yeah. So Devise has several commands that come with it. And the only two that we're really going to use in this video are no options or no colon option, and then Devise install. And so we'll do the first one is Rails generate Devise install. And that adds several files. It adds just, well, I guess it's just two, but they are the configuration file for Devise, and you'll want to go through and make some changes here if you're, doing this in production. And there's pretty much only two things that you'll look at are the secret key and this mailer. And then I guess the YAML file is probably like, yeah, it's locales and stuff. So if you need multiple languages. And so we're going to add this and just say we install Devise. And the last thing that we'll do is Rails generate Devise. And this time we're only going to add a user. And so this creates a migration that creates a Devise user, which it looks like this. It's just all the different options for a user. And you can enable more features as needed for Devise. And if you make these changes, you're going to want to take a look at the user model that it added so that you can add these options as well. So I'm going to leave it as is and just run Rails DB migrate. And that is that created our table for users. And it also added I guess it created our DB schema. And so that looks like this, and it's just the schema for the users table. So I'm going to say we add Devise user. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to do is add our project. And so we're just going to do a one-to-many association between user and projects. And so we'll just say Rails generate model. We're going to call it a project. It's going to have a title, and then we're also going to have a user. We're going to say belongs to. And the belongs to is kind of a special tag, I guess, whenever you're defining the type. And so it's going to do several things if we look at this. So create projects, and you can see it actually calls in the table definition .belongs to user. But the cool thing with this is that it's going to name this as user ID, but it's also going to add a foreign key index. And so the only thing to be careful with is if you don't have your database config set up as Postgres or any type of database that supports foreign keys, I don't think it'll add this by default. And it may include the foreign key, but it will especially not put the actual foreign key reference or constraint in the database schema file. So I always recommend just choosing the database that's as close to what you're using in production, if not the exact same type, whenever doing this. So now we are going to add our projects, and at the same time, I'm going to go into the user and just say that it's going to have many projects. Okay, so we will call RailsDB migrate again. And so that creates our table of projects, and I'm just going to commit this and just say add user projects. Okay, so now that we've had our schema, and we can kind of take a look at that in our schema RB, and you can see that we have projects. It added an integer for our user ID. That's interesting, but okay, so it uses a big int for this. It added an index, it named it, which is nice as well. And finally, it added the foreign key constraint between projects and users, and that just figures out that it's user ID whenever you do this. So the next thing that we're going to do is actually seed our database with some data so that we can actually test this, our GraphQL API out. And so I'm just going to go into our seeds file. It gives you some samples, like you're just going to create several movies and maybe do something with one of the movies. So what I'm going to do is I want to be able to just have like project titles. And I'm just going to say we're going to create like 10 project titles. And what I'm going to do is we'll add a gem called faker, but the method I guess that we're looking for is internet, namespace, and then domain word. And so I don't necessarily think this is my favorite, but it's fine for wanting to do. And so you can see that. So the Ruby gem is faker that we're going to add, and the home page has a list of everything that for the GitHub has everything that we're going to actually use or that you can use. And so I just scrolled through here and picked internet, and then through here I just scrolled through and I found that domain word. I don't remember where I saw that. So this. Yeah, so there's domain word, and there was also company. You can just kind of go through here and just see whatever you want to pick. So let's go ahead and add that to our gem file. And I did not realize I would have multiple Vim sessions. So we're going to just go ahead, and I'm just going to put a group in here for development. There's also one above, but because I folded it, I'll just use it here. And we'll add faker. I don't remember the version. 173. And so we will add that. Okay, so this just adds the faker gem to our project. We're going to commit and say add gem faker. And what we're going to do in our seeds is, so this gives us our words. We'll just really do a quick test here to make sure this is linked up correctly. So RailsDB seed. And it is, so there's our 10 words that it generates. And so the next thing that we're going to do is I'm going to create just 2 users, and I want to just split these 10 words or 10 projects among those 2 users. And so I'm just going to have my my split is going to be 4%, I guess, or 40% rather. And what I'm going to do is say an offset, and we're just going to say project titles length times our split. And so this is what we're going to do for this. We're going to create our project users. It's going to be a dictionary. And I'm just going to create like 2 users. And what I'm going to do is just take those project titles, and we're just going to grab from 0 to our offset for the first user. And the second user we'll just call Bob. and what Bob will get is from our offset to -1. And what this will do is it's going to grab the first, in this case, it's just going to grab 4. It's going to grab the first 4 for Leo, and it's going to grab the last 6 for Bob. And so this is just a nice way to give us the ability to change these numbers out and generate data that's different. So with these two pieces of information, this is pretty straightforward now. We're just going to go through those project users, and this is going to give us the user email, and it's also going to give us a list of projects. And what we're going to do is just create a new user. It's going to have an email that we provide, and I'm just going to make the password secret. And then for that user, what we're going to do is we're actually just going to go through projects. That's plural. And I'm just going to go over each of these, and it's going to give us that title. And I'm just going to say user.projects.build, and we're going to give that title whatever we have, call user.save. So just to kind of recap what this does, we generate 10 titles just from Faker. Then we're going to make a split and separate those groups of projects among 2 people. And then we're going to go through those, and we're going to create a new user. We're going to build and add projects to that user, and then we're going to do a single save per user. And so there's probably a better way to do this for efficiency, but since it's seed data, I'm not too concerned. And so with this, we're going to call Rails CV migrate, or I'm sorry, seed. And this doesn't provide any output to let us know what it did, but we can check real quick in the console, and we have 2 users. We have 2 projects, and we have 4 and 6 based off 1 and 2. So that did exactly what we want to do for adding those users. And so I'm just going to commit again. So that is the beginning of this. That gives us all the data. Now we're ready to start actually playing around. So what we're going to do is we're just going to add 2 more gems. So we'll go back to the gem file, and I'm going to pull up so we can get the version of our GraphQL gem, which is 164 as of this video. And this actually looks like it might move kind of fast, these versions. So you'll definitely want to double check that before just using what I have. So we're going to add the GraphQL gem. Now, this one I'm not going to commit right away, because what you have to do with GraphQL is run GraphQL install. And when you do this, it's going to modify our gem file. And so if we look at the gem file, because I've staged this, so we've staged part of the gem file that I ran right after I added GraphQL gem, and then we ran the Rails generate install, or GraphQL install, and so that modified it again. So we have it as those committed, but that lets us look at this and realize that or show us that it's added a new gem for development that adds graphical. So this gem will all in add GraphQL to our project and also give us the ability to use the graphical interface as well. And so I'm going to remove the gap that it introduced, and then we're just going to commit and say that we added. I'm just going to commit this as 1, so we're going to say add gem GraphQL, and then we're going to say that we installed GraphQL. So really, real quick, what we want to do, this is enough to actually get us started so we can play. But before we do that, what I want to take a look at is our routes. So you can see that, well, this came from Devise, but we've also introduced 2 new areas for GraphQL. And so in development only, we have access to graphical, which is just a Rails engine that it mounts. And this option here, you'll have to keep in sync with what's below so that it understands where to send its GraphQL request. And then this one is going to point to, so when we make a post request to GraphQL, it is going to execute it's going to execute the execute command. And so what we're going to take a look at real quick is our GraphQL controller. And you can just see that this is just a boilerplate method for actually invoking GraphQL and returning the JSON result. And so the amount of modifications that you have to make here is very minimal, if any. And so this gets us started. And what we're going to do is just start our Rails server. So I'm actually going to do this inside of Screen. It's just my go-to whenever I don't want to set up tmux. I'm just going to call bash with login to do what it asked me to do, and then we'll call Rails S. Perfect. So that starts our local host, and so that we can go to localhost port 3000 graphical. And so you can see here that GraphQL or graphical includes a full interface for active or accessing and playing with your GraphQL server. And it's also very, very cool because it gives you the ability to actually define your queries, make sure the results look right, and then you can just paste or copy the queries over to your project where you actually use them. And so what we're going to do is just open up the docs here, take a look at the query type. And so a real high level explanation of GraphQL is that you have just a handful of root types. You have queries and you have manipulations and other things like that. Manipulations are when you want to make changes to your data, and queries when you want to access or retrieve your data. And so in practice, or the common way of doing this, is you have a query type. And that query type defines how you access that data. And so GraphQL with Ruby, when you add it, you can see it adds an example field so that you can play with it. And so the way we access this is we can take a look that we have a root type of query. And so we can pass it in as query here. And this just is, I don't know how much GraphQL you know, but just so you get some of a primer. Inside these braces, we can access whatever our fields are. And so we can actually access test field here. And you can see that it returns back a JSON object that is very, very close to our very, very close representation of how we queried it. And query is optional, but yes. So that's what we're using, and that's what we're going to define our schema now to actually work with what we defined earlier with Rails. So let's take a look and kind of get a broad idea of how this actually works based on what we ran with that Rails GraphQL install. So I'm going to go back to outside of Screen. And so when we look at this, you can see that it's accessing this project's schema. And so if we take a look at that, you can see it just defines our query. And if we look at it like this, where we have query and then query type, you can see this is very close to what we saw from the root of our rubric or documentation, where we have some type of query type here at access of query. And so if we go inside of here, you can see we have the single field for test field. Likewise, if we go and take a look at this query type, you can see that we have the name of query, which is what we saw in the documentation. And then you can see we have this single field with an accessor of, or name of test field. We have the type that it's a string. And then inside of here, we define that our description for the documentation of what test field is. And then we have this lambda expression under resolve that takes in an object, arguments, and a context and returns back something. And so it just has to be the same type that we defined up here as string. And so, and you can see that we've said we have a test field. You can see the description, how it's added here. And then you can also see that when we invoked it, we return back our hello world. And so this is what we're going to do, basically just add more fields and more types here that we can use. So the first thing that we want to do, or that I'd like to do at least, is we're going to show who we are, because we're going to add authentication with this at a really simple high level. And so we want to take a look at something like having a me and say, what's my ID and what's my email? Of course, we run this right now, we're going to get an error that we don't have a field. So let's actually do that. So we're going to do another field here. We're going to call it me. And we're going to say that the type is a types. And this is, we haven't created this yet, but we're going to namespace it just like it is up here with types query type. And we're going to say we're going to have user type. And all we're going to do is describe how we get this. And we're just say this is the current user. And we'll say to resolve this, and what we're going to do is just return back the user.first. This is not, it's not the current user, but it is right now because we haven't defined a way to get the current user. So the only thing we need to do right now to make this even work is just to create a user type. And so you can see how this lives. It goes in app GraphQL types. And so we're just going to go and edit a file in their app GraphQL types, or call it user type.rb. And I'm going to namespace this under types. It's not a class, it's just a user type. And it's going to equal to GraphQL object type dot define do end. And so I'll add a name to name this user, and we'll have a description. And we're going to define just a quick field, and we're going to say types.int, and we'll also do our email. And we're going to say types.string. So these two we're just defining what you can access on our user. And so it's just going to know that users, basically it's just going to be handed in from this user.first, and then it's going to realize what you can actually invoke as a method. Two things to kind of be aware of is this bang here. What this does, it just tells our schema that this is required. And so it's not possible for our API to send down a null value for our integer here, for our ID. And the other thing is that this is going down as JSON, which you can't really see that here. But because it's JSON, it wants to be camel cased for these keys. And Ruby is underscored. And so if we had something like email address, what we'd want to do is actually pass this down as email address like so, and say the property is email. Or it'd be email underscore address if we define it that way. So property is just an option here that lets us actually say how we're going to get email address, because email big A address wouldn't work here. And you can kind of see that if we look at our schema when we look at email. It's like if we did an encrypted password, for instance, we'd want it underscored because that's Ruby's style, and we'd want it camel case because it's a JavaScript style. So I'm actually going to leave it like this, and then all we'll have to do here is just make this address. We have an error. Okay, there's the typo. So if we run this again, you can see that we have ID and we have email address, and we've actually brought this back from our current user, which is user 1. If I refresh the page, it'll update the documentation explorer, and so we can actually kind of see what we had. So we had me, where that returns back a user type, and that gives us our email address and ID. Now, something that's cool with GraphQL is we can actually rename this email address. And so, like if we had our system, we don't want email address, we just want email, we can actually just do that here. And you can see we get to define the schema. Not only the structure that we want it, but we can actually rename the keys how we want it as well. So it's very cool stuff. To avoid confusion for myself, I am going to rename this back to just email because I will probably forget and I don't want to do that. Okay, cool. So I'll just refresh the documentation and we can look at that. Cool. So that's the first thing. The next thing we want to do is just list out the current projects for our user. And so when we do that, it's going to be basically the same thing we just did. It's going to be a really minor change. We're going to have field for projects. And the only thing we're going to change here is this is going to be an array, right? Because we have multiple projects for our current user. And so we're going to call types with square brackets and say types, and then we're going to have our project type. And so whenever GraphQL sees this, it's going to understand that it's not a single project type like it is above here, but instead it's an array or a list. So we're going to have a description, and we're going to say the current projects for the current user. And to resolve this, we're just going to call project.all. So this definitely is not what we want to do long term, but just right now we're just going to roll with this so we can see all the projects. And so what we're going to do for this is just create a new project type. And so our project is going to have an ID, and we're also going to have our title. Now this could actually have a bug here because I did not define my project's title. It's nullable, right? So I didn't do like null false here. So we do have potential for a bug here because we could have a project with a null title, and then when it tried to send this down, it would throw an error that title is not nullable. We'll just roll with that. I am going to define a custom resolve here. And because what I want to do is just take in our user email and just concatenate that with the title. And this is interesting. So by default, if you look over at our query type, you can see that when we resolve, it just gives us object. Object in this case can really be thought of as like root. And we can think of it that way because we're in the query type, and when we look at our schema, you can see that this is just the root. There's only one query, and it's just query type. However, when we're over here and we're actually in our project type, our object is now scoped to our actual project. And so I'm going to rename object here to just project. And that's just so that later on I'll actually know that what our object type is better than I would with just object. And so now if we do this, we should be able to call our projects and get the ID and the title. And so, and I did this so we could actually see the user that's associated with this. Something I might do, and this is definitely something you would definitely not do in a real project, but I'm going to do it this way now so we can actually see when we're looking at our project who the user is that it belongs to. I actually meant to do that in the seed data, but I forgot, so I'm doing it here for now. So we can actually see that we have 4 projects that belong to Leo, and then the other 6 of them belong to Bob. So what we want to do is we've basically created our schema. We can actually access myself with me. We can access all our projects. But what's also really cool with GraphQL is we can actually go down through our objects. And so what we can also do is we can go to our project type. We can also add another field called user. And we're just going to say that this is a type of user type. And the only thing we have to do is really just that. What we can do now, refresh, we can look and see that we have projects, has a user accessor, returns back a user. And so now what we can do is give us back our user ID and email. We run that, and you can see here's our user and email. And so the reason that we did this with no resolve is because it's just going off the same name, and it just happens to understand that when I have user here, I'm going to get back an object, and that object's going to be user type. And so it just recursively just goes through there and understands that. And so it's super, super cool how we're able to define our own schema. So you can think about if you were writing an Angular application and you needed to display projects and their user information, that you could actually do that and define the schema that's specific to that endpoint. Or when I say endpoint, I mean in the Rails app or in the Angular app, excuse me. So you can see it's just unbelievable power that you have here, especially when you think about this, you can rename things as you need it. And you can do that for everything. We could actually name this X if we wanted to, and now projects is renamed to X. We can also X for multiple things. We can say me, and I get back myself. And so now that returns back in 2 objects. We have me and projects. There's a ton of power that can be accessed with GraphQL. And so the last thing that I think I'm going to touch on this video is how are we going to actually say, give me myself, right? Like when I ask for projects, this is giving projects for everybody and not just my current user. And so I guess the first thing I want to do is just commit. So we can say that we add basic GraphQL schema. So the step to actually doing this is very straightforward. What I'm going to do is actually just go inside of here. And if we want to access GraphQL, I'm going to require authentication. So I'm going to say authenticate user, and this is just given to us with Devise. And what this will do is as soon as I refresh the page, it's going to redirect us to sign in. And so I'm going to go and just log in as bobexample.com. Log in. And you can see now when I run this query, nothing changes, but it did require us to be logged in to actually see this. And so what I'm going to do, if we go back to our GraphQL controller, you can see it defines this default context object. And it's ready for us to give this a current user. The only thing that we probably want to do is say before action and authenticate user. This is also a Devise method here that's available to us in the controllers. And this is only necessary because we've required authentication to GraphQL, so it makes sense that we require authentication to the actual GraphQL endpoint. And you would probably change this. You most likely would not just authenticate with just standard, well, I guess it depends on the application, but most likely you're going to have a different endpoint where you actually define or authenticate with like a token or something. But this is perfect for us because if we already have access to our current user, and so now if we go back to our project schema, our query type, when we ask for me, what we can use is we go to this context, and this context is going to have our current user. And we can go ahead and do the same thing down here. When we ask for projects, we can ask for context current user.projects. And so now if I run this, you can see that we're only getting back projects that belong to Bob. And what I'm going to do is just copy this URL and hit it in an incognito window or a private Safari window and look at Leo's. And so we'll make the same query. We're just going to ask for me this time though and say ID title. This is a problem that I have in incognito windows. That's email. And so it's a weird, I don't understand it, but whenever it's private window, it doesn't understand how it can access data or whatever. So yeah, so we are able to access myself. We get back our information. We can also access the projects. We can ask for just the title, and we'll ask for the user email. And you can see now for Leo, we only get back our 4 projects. In addition to that, we have a custom schema that doesn't follow the same lines that Bob wants over on his window. So a couple things to kind of be aware of here. This completes the video, just some kind of minor things to kind of be aware of. Generally, what you'll find in GraphQL APIs is they don't actually put out integer IDs. Instead, they'll put out a string version of it, which is a hash. And so I may do that in this video, but I'll probably just make another one. So that we'll want to do something to hash these IDs so that they're very unique. I find this kind of important also just for, because we'll look at more things in the future, but there's a concept to actually use nodes here where you would say node, you give it an ID, and you would specify something. So if I said 5, it would just tell me my object type. I don't remember what it is. I think it's just type name or something like this. It's available everywhere, I believe. That's not right. Okay. So we have a type, and we can do stuff like when we're on a project, we want to get back the ID and the title. When we're on a user, we want to get back the ID and the email, right? And ID is global, so we can actually put that up here. But the point is, and that's a singular node, when we do this, like ID doesn't mean anything because we could have a project with an ID of 5. We could also have a user with an ID of 5. And so that's one reason why to hash it. Another reason is we don't want users kind of snooping around and trying to see where we have holes, right? So what I'll probably do in a future video is we'll add some type of unique key per user, and then when we hash these IDs, we'll be able to include that unique hash. So it makes every user's IDs very specific to their type and integer ID variant. In addition to that, so that's kind of like the first thing, and the next thing to look at is our server is very inefficient. You can't really see it with these because we don't have enough queries or enough object types. But if we had projects, and then I don't know what a project might have, but we might have like goals or whatever. And so in our schema, we wanted to look at like, give me all the projects, give me the user that belongs to the project, and then give me like the goals for that project. And we would have something like the title of that goal. Was it completed? When was it started? Right. And as soon as we start doing this, this is going to create a big O notation where we ask for projects and then we start asking for goals. And we do that in just for every project we ask for goals. Every project we ask for goals. And we do that too many times, we'll have very slow queries. And so we'll probably look at how to optimize our queries. We'll look at hashing and other things that I'll think of. So thank you for watching this video. If you made it all the way through, hope you enjoyed it, and good night.